Hello everyone, I hope you're having a wonderful day. Today we'll discover how Tieu Lac secretly saves Quan's company, and how one familiar handwriting on an anonymous package reveals that she is still protecting him from the shadows. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next videos. After leaving behind a farewell letter and every bit of money she had managed to save, Tieu Lac disappeared from Quan's life without telling anyone where she was going. She believed leaving was the only way to protect him. Quan had already done too much for her. He had helped her family, defended her when others looked down on her, and stood beside her when she had no one else to rely on. The more kindness he showed, the more afraid Tieu Lac became that her troubles would eventually drag him down. So she walked away with nothing but a small bag and a heart full of pain. She left the quiet countryside behind and made her way to the city, hoping she could disappear among the crowds. The city was louder, colder, and far less forgiving than the peaceful farm she had known. Nobody cared where she came from. Nobody asked why she looked exhausted. As long as she could work, she could earn enough to survive another day. Tieu Lac accepted whatever job she could find. In the morning, she carried bowls and plates through crowded food stalls. In the afternoon, she cleaned greasy tables and swept dirty floors. At night, she stood behind small kitchens, washing piles of dishes, until her hands became red and swollen. The pay was low, but she never complained. She slept in a cheap shared room and spent as little as possible. She wore the same simple clothes until the fabric became faded. She often skipped meals so she could save a little money for emergencies. Every day was tiring, but she told herself this was the life she had chosen. At least Quan would no longer have to protect her. At least her family's debts and problems would not follow him. But no matter how hard she worked, she could not stop thinking about him. Whenever she saw someone wearing a clean white shirt, she remembered Quan. Whenever a customer quietly placed a bowl of food in front of another person, she remembered the simple meals they had shared. Sometimes while washing dishes, she would suddenly remember the look in his eyes. When he realized she was hiding her pain, those memories made her chest tighten. Still, she forced herself to continue. One evening, Tieu Lac was working at a small restaurant located near a busy commercial district. It was not an expensive place, but many office workers and businessmen stopped there because the back rooms offered privacy. The restaurant owner asked her to clean a narrow storage area behind one of the private dining rooms. It was a dark corner filled with empty boxes, broken chairs, and bags of unused supplies. The wall between the storage area and the private room was thin, and part of the wooden partition had cracked. Tieu Lac was quietly gathering rubbish when she heard several men speaking on the other side. At first, she paid no attention. Customers often discussed business, money, and contracts. None of it had anything to do with her. She lowered her head and continued sweeping. Then she heard a name that made her entire body freeze. Sun Company. The broom stopped moving in her hand. Sun Company belonged to Quan. Tieu Lac slowly turned her head toward the damaged partition. One of the men laughed in a low voice. Once these payments are transferred, it will be too late for Quan to stop anything. Another man replied, the fashion contracts have already been approved. The plastic furniture orders are being processed through the same group of suppliers. On paper, everything looks normal. Tieu Lac's fingers tightened around the broom handle. She did not understand every business term they used, but she understood enough to know they were talking about something illegal. The men described contracts for fashion products that had never actually been produced. They talked about expensive furniture made from high-grade plastic, but the numbers in the documents were fake. The company was supposedly buying large quantities of goods, while the money was being moved through several outside accounts. One of them mentioned that the contracts had been signed while Quan was away. Another said, his stepmother made sure the board approved everything quickly. She promised that by the time Quan realized what happened, the money would already be gone. Tieu Lac felt cold. Quan's stepmother. She remembered hearing that Quan's company had entered a serious financial crisis. People had said he had made bad decisions or failed to control the business. Some even believed the company was collapsing because Quan had lost focus. But now Tieu Lac understood. Someone had been stealing from him. These people had used fake contracts to drain money from Sun Company while Quan was away. His stepmother had secretly signed the deals, and there were insiders helping her hide the transactions. Tieu Lac's breathing became shallow. She knew she should leave. If the men discovered that a poor restaurant worker had heard their conversation, they might threaten her or worse. She had no power, no money, and no one nearby who would risk protecting her. Her first instinct was fear. Then she thought of Quan. She pictured him sitting alone in his office, surrounded by reports and accusations, trying to save a company while people he trusted worked against him. She imagined him blaming himself for losses he had not caused. Tieu Lac looked down at the old phone in the pocket of her apron. It was scratched, slow, and barely held a charge, but it could still record sound. Her hands began to tremble. She carefully placed the broom against the wall, then took out the phone as quietly as possible. She checked the screen and lowered the volume completely. Her thumb hovered above the recording button. For a moment, she hesitated. If she made even one sound, the men could hear her. But if she walked away, Quan might lose everything. Tieu Lac pressed record. She held the phone close to the crack in the partition and stood completely still. On the other side, the men continued talking. They discussed account numbers, payment dates, and the names of several people inside the company. They explained how money from the fake fashion and furniture contracts would be divided after it was transferred. One of them warned that Quan had begun reviewing the company's finances more carefully. Another responded with confidence. He has no proof. His stepmother controlled the signatures, and the people inside the finance department have already changed the records. The group laughed. Tieu Lac's jaw tightened. She felt angry in a way she had rarely allowed herself to feel. Quan had helped so many people, yet those closest to his company were using his absence to destroy everything he had built. She kept recording. Her arm began to ache from holding the phone in the same position, but she did not move. Sweat gathered along her hairline even though the storage area was cool. One man suddenly lowered his voice. "Burn the remaining drafts. We cannot leave anything that connects the supplier accounts to the board." Tieu Lac's eyes widened. A chair scraped against the floor. The meeting was ending. She quickly stopped the recording, slipped the phone back into her apron, and grabbed the broom. She began sweeping again just as the private room door opened. Footsteps moved through the hallway. Tieu Lac kept her head down. 3 men passed the entrance to the storage area. One briefly looked in her direction, but she continued cleaning as if she had heard nothing. Her heart pounded so loudly she was afraid they might hear it. Only when the restaurant door closed behind them did she finally breathe. She waited several minutes before entering the private room. The table was covered with used cups, cigarette ash, and food that had barely been touched. A waste bin stood near the wall. Tieu Lac looked toward the hallway, made sure no one was watching, and carefully searched inside. At first, she found only tissues and food wrappers. Then she saw torn pieces of printed paper. Her hands moved quickly. She pulled out every piece she could find and hid them inside a clean plastic bag. Some contained numbers. Others showed partial company names, supplier details, and signatures. The men had torn the drafts into many pieces, but they had not destroyed them completely. Tieu Lac finished her shift without telling anyone what she had heard. Back in her small room, she locked the door and placed the plastic bag on the floor. She turned on the weakest lamp and began arranging the torn pieces. It was difficult work. Some fragments were stained, others were missing corners. She matched lines, numbers, logos, and pieces of signatures one by one. Several times she became frustrated and had to begin again. Hours passed. Her eyes became sore and her back ached from bending over the floor. But slowly the documents began to take shape. She could see references to Sun Company. She could see the fake fashion contracts. She could see invoices connected to high-grade plastic furniture. Most importantly, she could see names and payment information that matched the conversation on her phone. Tieu Lac stared at the reconstructed papers. She was only a waitress and cleaner living at the bottom of the city. She did not understand corporate law. She did not know how board investigations worked. But she understood one thing clearly. This evidence could save Quan. And even though she had left him, even though she was hiding and struggling to survive with nothing, she could not ignore the danger surrounding him. Tieu Lac placed the phone beside the repair documents. Her fear had not disappeared, but now it was competing with something stronger. The quiet determination to protect the man who had once protected her. Tieu Lac spent the rest of the night checking the recording and arranging the documents. She listened carefully to every word captured on her old phone. The audio was not perfect. There were sounds from the kitchen, dishes hitting each other, footsteps in the hallway, and the hum of the restaurant's ventilation fan. But the voices of the men were still clear enough. They mentioned Sun Company. They mentioned fake fashion contracts. They mentioned high-grade plastic furniture orders that existed only on paper. They mentioned the stepmother's involvement, the internal finance team, and the plan to move a huge amount of money before Quan could stop them. Tieu Lac listened again and again, writing down the names and numbers she could understand. Whenever the recording became unclear, she replayed the same section until she caught the words. The more she heard, the more certain she became. This was not a misunderstanding. It was a carefully planned operation to drain Sun Company from the inside. But knowing the truth was only the beginning. Tieu Lac now had to decide how to place the evidence in Quan's hands without revealing where she was. She could not deliver it herself. If she appeared at the company, Quan would find her immediately. And even though every part of her wanted to see him, she was still convinced that returning would only bring more trouble into his life. She also feared the people behind the scheme. If they discovered that she had recorded them, they might search for her. They might destroy the evidence. They might even use her to threaten Quan. Tieu Lac needed someone she could trust. After thinking for a long time, one name came to mind. Nam. She had met Quan's assistant several times before. Nam was always close to him, always careful, and always serious about protecting the company. More importantly, Quan trusted him completely. If the package reached Nam, Tieu Lac believed the evidence would reach Quan safely. She found a cheap memory card and transferred the recording from her phone. Because the phone was old and slow, the process failed twice. Each time, her heart tightened with fear that the file might disappear. On the third attempt, the transfer worked. Tieu Lac tested the memory card by playing the recording from beginning to end. She then placed it inside a small plastic case and wrapped the reconstructed documents in several sheets of paper so the torn pieces would not separate. She did not write her name. She did not include a return address. She only wrote a short message. Please give this directly to Assistant Nam. The contents concern Sun Company and must reach President Quan immediately. She paused after writing Quan's name. Her fingers rested on the paper. For one brief moment, she wanted to add something personal. She wanted to tell him she was safe. She wanted to apologize for leaving. She wanted to ask whether he was eating properly or sleeping at all. But she stopped herself. If Quan recognized her words, he might begin searching the area immediately. So she folded the note and placed it inside the package. The following day, Tieu Lac finished her work early and walked to a post office far from the room where she was staying. She wore a plain hat and kept her face lowered. The package was small, but she held it against her chest as if it contained something far more valuable than paper and a recording. In a way, it did. It contained Quan's chance to fight back. At the counter, the employee asked for the sender's information. Tieu Lac hesitated before giving a false name and an incomplete address. Her hands trembled slightly as she filled out the form. She was afraid someone might notice her. She was afraid the conspirators might already be watching the company. She was afraid the package could be lost. But she completed the form, paid the shipping fee, and watched the employee place it with the outgoing parcels. When Tieu Lac walked out of the post office, she felt both relieved and terrified. Now all she could do was wait. At Sun Company, the situation had reached a dangerous point. The board of directors was divided. Several senior managers were questioning Quan's leadership. Suppliers were demanding payment. Investors were nervous, and rumors about the company's financial instability were spreading rapidly. Quan had discovered unusual losses, but the documents in the system appeared legitimate. Every contract had signatures. Every transaction had been approved by the correct departments. The people behind the scheme had covered their tracks carefully. Quan knew someone was manipulating the company, but without decisive proof, he could not remove them. His stepmother had become strangely quiet. She attended fewer meetings, spoke carefully, and allowed others to defend the contracts for her. It was as if she believed the damage was already complete. Nam had been investigating for days, but every trail seemed to end with missing records or employees who claimed they knew nothing. Then the anonymous package arrived. A receptionist brought it directly to Nam because his name was written clearly on the outside. Nam examined the package with suspicion. There was no reliable sender information. The wrapping was simple, and the address had been written by hand. Under normal circumstances, he might have sent it to security first. But the words Sun Company and President Quan made him open it immediately. Inside, he found the memory card, the reconstructed contract drafts, and the short note. Nam's expression changed as soon as he saw the company name, printed across the torn pages. He inserted the memory card into his computer and played the recording. Within minutes, he stood up from his chair. He grabbed the documents and rushed toward Quan's office. Quan was in the middle of a tense meeting with the finance and legal teams. When Nam entered without waiting for permission, everyone turned toward him. Nam rarely interrupted a meeting. "President Quan," he said, breathing quickly, "you need to hear this now." Quan saw the urgency in his face and immediately ended the discussion. When the room was empty, Nam locked the door and placed the package on the desk. "Someone sent this directly to me." Quan listened to the recording in silence. At first, his face revealed nothing, but as the voices mentioned the fake contracts, the supplier accounts, the finance department, and his stepmother's role, his eyes grew colder. Nam spread the repaired documents across the desk. The pieces were unevenly taped together, but the information was visible. The account numbers matched suspicious transfers already found in the company records. The supplier names connected directly to the fashion and plastic furniture contracts. One torn page contained an internal approval code known only to senior management. It was the evidence they had been missing. Within hours, Quan ordered a full internal investigation. The legal team froze the remaining transfers. The finance department traced the outside accounts. Nam compared the voices in the recording with employees and business partners who had attended earlier meetings. The conspiracy began to collapse. One manager admitted that he had altered financial records under pressure. Another revealed where the original contracts had been hidden. A supplier confirmed that the orders had never been delivered, even though Sun Company had paid large deposits. The stepmother tried to deny everything. She claimed the signatures had been forged. She accused Quan of using false evidence to remove her from the company. But the recording, payment records, contract drafts, and employee testimony all pointed in the same direction. At the emergency board meeting, Quan presented every piece of evidence clearly. There was no shouting, no dramatic argument. He did not need one. The facts were enough. The board voted to remove the stepmother and every executive involved in the scheme. Legal action began immediately. Their access to company accounts was canceled and security escorted them out of the building. For the first time in weeks, Sun Company had a real chance to survive. Nam could barely hide his relief. "We were lucky," he said after the meeting. "Whoever sent that package saved the company." Quan did not answer. He was holding the outer wrapping in his hands. While Nam had focused on the recording and documents, Quan had been staring at the handwritten address. The letters were neat, careful, and slightly rounded. He had seen that handwriting before. Quan's fingers tightened around the package. He opened a drawer and pulled out the farewell letter Tieu Lac had left at the farm. The paper was worn at the folds because he had opened it so many times. He placed the letter beside the package. The handwriting matched, the shape of the words, the spacing between the lines, even the way certain letters leaned slightly to one side. Quan's expression changed completely. His eyes became red. Nam looked from the package to the letter and immediately understood. "Tieu Lac sent this?" Quan did not respond at first. His chest felt tight. She was somewhere in the city, working in small restaurants, washing dishes, cleaning floors, and surviving with almost nothing. She was hiding from him. She had left because she believed she was a burden. And yet, when she discovered that his company was in danger, she had risked herself to collect evidence and send it to him. Even while running away, she had never truly turned away from him. Quan lowered his head and pressed the package between his hands. She had nothing, he said quietly, and she still found a way to save everything I built. Nam had never seen him look so shaken. The victory at the board meeting no longer seemed important to Quan. The only thing that mattered was that Tieu Lac was alive, somewhere nearby, and still watching over him from a distance. His confusion disappeared. His guilt became determination. Quan stood up sharply. "Find the post office where this package was sent." Nam nodded immediately. "Request every camera recording around the building," Quan continued. "The entrance, the counter, nearby streets, bus stops, shops, everything." "What time period?" "Start from the shipping time on the receipt. Check the entire day." Nam reached for his phone. Quan looked once more at Tieu Lac's handwriting. His voice became firm. "I do not care how many cameras we have to review, or how many streets we have to search." He folded the farewell letter carefully and placed it against the anonymous package. His eyes hardened with a promise he intended to keep. "This time, I am bringing her home." After leaving Quan a farewell letter and all her savings, Tieu Lac disappears into the city and survives by washing dishes, cleaning tables, and serving food in small restaurants. While working near a private dining room, she overhears several men discussing fake fashion and high-grade plastic furniture contracts used to steal money from Sun Company. Realizing Quan is being betrayed by his stepmother and insiders, Tieu Lac secretly records their conversation and collects torn contract drafts from the trash. She carefully reconstructs the documents, places the recording on a memory card, and anonymously sends the evidence to Assistant Nam. The package helps Quan expose the entire scheme and remove the corrupt group from the company. But when Quan recognizes Tieu Lac's handwriting on the parcel, he realizes she is still protecting him from afar and vows to find her again.